So this is Dr. Lonsrich, and this lecture is one of two for the last week of the semester. And the topic is, there's actually two topics. It's three, digestion, circulation, and excretory system. Okay, so moving on. This is, I don't know how long. It's got to be 14 slides, so it'll probably take 15 minutes or more. This is a nice diagram, kind of help us understand what's going on. So food we eat, some of that food gets assimilated, and some of it goes out through the alimentary canal to the other side. Number two, right? And then some of that assimilated food, how does it get assimilated? It goes through the small intestine. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And some of that gets used to make new growth, like muscle and fat and so forth. Some of it's used to run machinery of cells. And then eventually it's all removed. The proteins are broken down into ammonia and urea, and the stuff gets excreted, right? And so some of it's also removed from the breath, from your breathing, but what I want to focus on is the excretory part. So this is about digestion, circulatory system, moving stuff around once the food gets into the body and is assimilated, and then the excretory system to help remove it eventually, that which becomes waste. Okay, continuing. We'll focus first on the digestive system. Digestive systems are pretty remarkably similar across a lot of different animals. Even insects have really complex circulatory system or digestive systems that are very much like ours. The focus is going to be on mammals' digestive system. And it begins with the mouth, of course, right? Mouth with all teeth and saliva, has digestive enzymes in it. And then it goes down to the esophagus. So the esophagus takes it to the stomach. The stomach has acid produced by cells that surround the stomach lumen, which is the cavity. And the acids help digest material that is making its way down from the mouth. There also are proteins here. There's a protein called pepsin. You should know these. Acid, pepsin breaks down proteins. And then from the stomach, the food continues into the small intestine. So the stomach, the small intestine. Small intestine has a lot of things going on. The first thing that you need to know about the small intestine is that it is associated with continuing the processing of digestion, breaking down food. There are a lot of ways this happens. The first one is that there are enzymes in the small intestine that actually help break down carbs and proteins and fats. But there are also chemicals coming from two other organs, and those other organs are known as the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. And really it's the liver and the pancreas that are important in this story. The gallbladder is kind of important, but the gallbladder plays a subservient role to the liver, because gallbladder is basically a storage organ for stuff that's coming from the liver. So the pancreas and the liver both deliver things to the small intestine. The liver delivers something called bile, B-I-L-E. And bile, I want you to think of bile as like a soap. It separates fat into small particles so that enzymes can attack it and break it down. Otherwise, fat will form globules and it would slow down the process of fat breakdown as a consequence. So bile is a soap, essentially. And then there's something in the pancreas that comes out. Actually, there are several things, but the one I want you to know is that the pancreas produces HCO3 minus 2, which is bicarbonate ions. And bicarbonate neutralizes the acid coming from the stomach. It's like eating a Tums tablet. It helps with acid indigestion. Well, we naturally produce an antacid in our pancreas. Otherwise, the acid coming from the stomach would digest the small intestine. So the bicarbonate is actually a really important adaptation. Okay, so small intestine makes enzymes. Small intestine gets bile from liver. Pancreas brings in bicarbonate and other things too. But for now, that's all I want you to know. And then the small intestine is a place where food is absorbed. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In fact, most, if not all, food is absorbed in the small intestine. What is it being absorbed by? It's being absorbed by the body. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then it goes to the large intestine. Large intestine goes down to the rectum and the anus. Mostly it's water and vitamins in the large intestine. No nutrients, no carbs or fats, etc. Okay, so there you go. I'm not interested in having you know any more of this. This is mostly about like, wow, these animals have a pretty similar system to us. And that's worth remembering. Okay, next slide. So here is the small intestine wall. The small intestine has a large surface area to increase absorption. So things are being absorbed through the cells into the circulatory system. And what are those things? Well, they're carbs and carbohydrates, molecules like glucose, amino acids, fat molecules, and even nucleotides. And water. A lot of water is being absorbed through this wall. Okay, so here are those two organs, the liver and the pancreas, and they're called accessory organs, and the gallbladder is going to contain the bile produced from the liver, and then they are delivered into the small intestine through the pancreatic duct and through a bile duct. Now we move on to the last part of this presentation, actually second to last, the circulatory system. So here's the digestive system, right? I talk about connections. So when digestive materials are absorbed by the small intestine, they go into the circulatory system. At least most of them do. And that's the focus here is on the circulatory system. There's another system called lymphatic system for another class. Anyways, digestive system materials are moved into the circulatory system. Into the circulatory system, those foods will go into veins, which will then be taken to the heart. And in the heart, the blood will be pumped through 4 chambers and 2 circuits, which we will talk about in just a moment. And the lungs are involved in these circuits. So we got veins into heart, then we got arteries that are in red that are also associated with the heart, then you got lungs, and you've got 2 circuits. So how does all this work? Let's just focus on the circuits now. So there are 2 circuits. There's the systemic circuit and there's a pulmonary circuit. And the systemic circuit is here, I'm tracing it. It's this group of vessels that are taking blood to the system, like your arms, fingers, or your legs, your small intestine, and bringing it back from those things into the heart. That's the systemic circuit. So the next circuit is called the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary circuit is leaving the heart and it's going to the lungs. And the lungs are picking up oxygen and bringing back the oxygenated blood to the heart. Please remember this. The blood color is not an indicator of whether something's a vein or an artery. A vein or artery are defined by not the color, but the direction. If blood is leaving the heart, it's called an artery. So this blue one, those are called pulmonary arteries. The red ones coming back to the heart, these are called pulmonary veins. So it's not about color. Remember that. That's a good test question. Okay, so 2 circuits, and then there are 4 chambers. 4 chambers, let's talk about those chambers here. There's a right atrium, and you're looking at this from your perspective, what's on your right side. So there's right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, and blood comes from the systemic circuit into the right atrium. So it's veins into the right atrium. Blood then goes into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, blood goes into the pulmonary circuit. So here's the right ventricle. Blood leaving into the pulmonary circuit, going into pulmonary arteries, then to the lungs, then back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. And that right there is the left atrium. So that left atrium here then delivers blood to the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps, and it delivers blood to this artery right here, which is the biggest artery in our body. It's called the aorta. It's about an inch diameter. So it's a big one. And then all the smaller ones come off of it. So that's 2 circuits. That's 4 chambers. And you need to know that. And you need to know what I gave you on my homework problem for this week that has to do with tracing the movement of something. So what is blood? Blood, of course, is found inside the circulatory system in mammals, in fish, and all sorts of vertebrates. It's the same. But in an insect, insects have blood, but they are missing something. Insects do not have red blood cells. And that has to do with the way that insects breathe, which means that insects don't have lungs. We have a lot of blood in our body. Most of that blood, about 55% of it, is red blood cells. The rest of it is actually red blood cells and white blood cells. Probably about 50%, 5%, and maybe like 2%. And then the rest of it's water, and dissolved in that water are nutrients. And so you should know that stuff. This is open book, remember, so I'm not asking you to memorize this. This is interesting. This is like, and I might ask you, like, how do amphibians and reptiles and birds differ from each other? You're going to want to look at this one. All right, we'll move on. So I just gave you the circulatory system. Now we get to the last part, number 1, making urine. So let's start with the organs. We got kidneys, and we've got ureters, which are the tubes that lead from the kidneys down to the bladder, and then there's a urethra that delivers urine to the outside world. Inside of that kidney is a structure called the nephron, this thing right here. And I say a structure. I think there are a million of each of in each kidney. So there are a lot of these. This is called the nephron. This is an important thing to remember. The nephron is involved in producing urine. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but I will want you to know this, that there are 4 processes that I want you to remember. There's filtration. So here are blood vessels that are filtering things into the nephron. And then there's stuff that's reabsorbed, that is, say, reabsorbed by the body. And that would include like most of your water and salt. I think there's like 180 liters of water that filtered through your nephrons every day, but you only lose like 1.5 liters. So most of it's reabsorbed. And the same goes with salt too. And then there are some things that are secreted by the bloodstream into the nephron, and that would be things like urea, which is ammonia byproduct. And then there's this thing called excretion, which is peeing out stuff, making urine. Okay. One of the things that's unusual and unique to humans, or mammals I should say, is this thing called the loop of Henle. So this whole thing is called the nephron. And this part here, this deep tube, is called the loop of Henle. And the only thing you need to know is that the loop of Henle is involved in concentrating urine. So that means that the salt concentration of the urine is saltier than the concentration of salts in the blood. And some animals need to have really long loop of Henle to make the urine saltier and consequently conserve water. So beavers have really short loop of Henles relative to rabbits, which have shorter loops than kangaroo rats. Kangaroo rats don't even drink water, so they have to conserve a lot of it. So the longer the loop, the more water conservation can happen, the more likely an animal is going to live in a place where water conservation is important. And that is all there is. Thanks.